What is our relationship to light and how it is used and weaponized as a colonial tool against the people? And how do we as people harness our own inner light and our collective light as a strategy towards liberation? Saludos and welcome to the Rematriating Borikén podcast, where we discuss the journey to the essence of these islands, this archipelago and her surrounding waters, the restoration of our essence before conquests and continued colonialism, the reclamation of our collective healing and liberation. I am Yasmin Hernandez, creator of CucubaNación, artist, writer, activist, born and raised in Brooklyn, Rematriating Borikén. Hoping that folks could take advantage and see all these planets that are visible in our skies right now. Mars is the orange guy, twinkling like an orange star. Venus is some kind of crazy. She's like in all her glory, sparkling like that diamond. Usually up above, headed towards the west around sundown. And in these days, there's a little tiny star situation next to her. That's not as bright, that's not as large, because she's so bright, she's so close to us. But that other second star is Saturn. And then if you look more towards the east, high up, you will see Jupiter, which would be that biggest second thing next to Venus, biggest, brightest. Jupiter is not as big as Venus because, again, the distance from us, but because he's so big, still bright and shiny nonetheless. Here in Puerto Rico, January and February, I don't know if everywhere, pero por lo menos aquí en el noroeste, it's the time of rainbows. There's a lot of sun, there's a lot of breeze, it gets cooler, but there are also a lot of passing showers. Los norte de gandules, some of the things that we've heard of how they're referred to in those passing showers, or oftentimes sun showers, just or lead to the prevalence of rainbows. And it's a magical time. I recorded an opening to this light episode. I try to not allow myself to be detoured, desviada, but nor do I want to glaze over what's going on and not acknowledge and not offer some thoughts on it, in solidarity with those of us that are feeling pulled, that our attention, our heart, our spirit pulled in another direction than where we decided we wanted to walk and focus on this year, right? And here's this year, 2025, just being crazy from inception, crazy from that first apagón, crazy from the wildfires, crazy from these inaugurations, crazy with these deportations and state violence and everything else that we're seeing. And so I separated the two, that interception, and it was a necessary interception. And that's the importance, is not to ignore, not to resist when these things come in. Like, there are things coming to light. I keep coming back to that term, what's coming to light. We are on this light side of the winter solstice up here in the north. We are now with this new moon in Aquarius, which also marks the lunar new year, the first new moon phase of 2025. So preferring to start in this way with this new moon, looking for new energy. If you follow Chinese astrology, it is a shift with the wedding snake and more creative energy, and hoping that we can harness this to keep the focus on what it is that our inner light is asking of us, versus reacting to what the forces that be are pushing us into. Why a conversation on light in Puerto Rico, that commodified entity that is a colony of the U.S. empire and still being exploited, extracted by outside corporations, we have this very conflicted relationship with light today. Whereas one of the things that the United States has pushed as a symbol of development, as a symbol of first worldness, is access to amenities, access to services. Yet this colony of the first world no puede contar con luz eléctrica constante, right? These constant power outages down to the most recent and most popular because it happened on New Year's Eve. But that is what we also call artificial light. And the generation of electricity for this artificial light is still something crucial for, say, medical health, for, say, safety on the roads. One of the things that people don't consider in the day-to-day impact of power outages is simple stuff like, how do we navigate on the streets when we don't have traffic lights? Picking up your kids from school at 3:00, everybody's out on the road with their babies in their cars. And if there aren't traffic lights, then what is that implication in terms of safety? And then there's the other element, the one that I love to be inspired by, because it is what most inspires me, and that is bioluminescence. Que Puerto Rico holds this high position on the planet for its prevalence of bioluminescent bays, and in general bioluminescence, because it sort of exists around the archipelago, not just in our waters, in our trenches and troves of the deep sea, the deepest part of the Atlantic being off the northern shore of Puerto Rico, and of course in our skies, or from different plant life in Ejunque to the luciérnagas or fireflies and the cucubanos, bioluminescent click beetles. So what is our relationship to light? What is our relationship to spirituality if we look at light as energy? What is our relationship to light and how it is used and weaponized as a colonial tool against the people? And how do we as people harness our own inner light and our collective light as a strategy towards liberation? So this is a rather ambitious episode in this discussion on light, moving from the light in our skies at night to our experience getting electricity back 4 months following Hurricane María, which was actually this week in which I'm recording this is the anniversary, to then moving into a more technical and symbolic conversation on light, summarizing the last Trinchera de Ideas that we had here in CucubaNación in Mayagüez, discussing all these elements and implications and lessons of light. So the image that I use for this episode on the slate, it's an image that's actually me with the pañuelo. And this is an image that my husband took in our home at the time in Moca, which is the date I just noticed today. The date, this came up on my memories a few weeks ago. And I thought it was really interesting because I know that January is the anniversary of when we got our electricity back. But the date on the images he sent me today, because he has a whole bunch of them from that moment, is October 24, 2017. And so the reason why this image is perfect for this episode, first, that light reflecting off of his computer screen. I don't know if it's the flash on his phone as he took the picture. If it was October 24, 2017, we had just gotten back our phone signal 4 days before. So we didn't have telephone signal for 1 month. We didn't have light for about 53 days. I think it was, we didn't have running water for about 53 days. And then we didn't have electricity for 4.5 months. And so when I say 4.5 months, I'm combining some of the time after Irma. It was about 2 weeks after Irma without light, I believe. This is how he and I worked, crammed into this space between the counter, la estufa, y la nevera. Reason being that the only electricity we had access to in these months were from our neighbors. We woke up on the morning of the 21st of September at 6 a.m. finally to find that Maria had left. At that point, from what I feel, there were about 30 hours that we were experiencing it. And we woke up at 6, came upstairs, and just the shock of everything is wet, windows are missing, doors busted, although we had known that from the day before. And at 7 a.m., my neighbor arrives with like 7 different extensions in her hands, letting us know that they would be connecting us to their planta. They had a very heavy-duty planta. And so that is what we did. That extension y una lluvia que caían en esa temporada, y nosotros con estas extensiones conectadas to our neighbor's planta, run across part of their patio, over the fence, part of our little side patio, up into our back little terraza, through the door or window, I don't remember how it came, into our kitchen, to one power cord, like one power strip. And on that one power strip, they would turn on their planta every night around 6. Y con eso conectábamos una lámpara, la nevera, and the boys would be able to, like, on our iPads, watch like whatever programs we had saved, and they would have light to play, and we would have light to cook, and we would connect an abanico, and all that would happen. And then around 8 o'clock, we would put the boys to sleep. The boys were 5 and 8 years old. And at that time, he and I would cram into that same space and connect our computers, to charge our computers so that we could do our work. That is how we managed to function. And then they would turn off their planta around 10 o'clock. So si era como una hora, maybe we would connect the computers right away so that they could charge. But we would only be able to work like that with light until they turned their planta off. Y entonces nos tocaba seguir, with whatever juice we were able to get for that time that the computers were connected, seguir con linterna, and then in the morning after the kids were in school, continue. I should add that the reason why we did this for about 2 months is that you couldn't find plantas in Puerto Rico. The supply was just not there. By the time the plantas started to arrive was a little later, and they were a lot more expensive. And so what had happened was my mother sent a planta from Brooklyn. It cost more money to ship the planta, I think, than the cost of the planta itself. And so by early November, we were finally able to connect ourselves. Out of darkness. I raged at 5 days of no light post Irma. I raged at 5 weeks, no light post María. I feared that Borikén would hear me and deliver 5 months of darkness. Well, she did practically. Over 4 months of no light. You hear these stories and always think that these things only happen to someone else. Those lampposts lied on the side of the road next to our house for weeks. During Mom's stay one day, some trucks arrived. Clapping her hands, she chanted around the house, Alegría, Alegría. She was determined to see our lights back on before leaving back to Brooklyn. Didn't happen. That day the trucks arrived. The posts were finally installed. He maneuvers the posts suspended from the chains into holes the truck machinery had just drilled. It had taken 2 months to get the posts, then 3 or so weeks to get them up. It was about another week and a half before the trucks returned and connected the lines, but they finally did. End of January. We had been in the dark since September. There's always that strange sense of grief that comes with victory. We invest so much of our existence in the dynamics of that state, forget how we lived outside of it. Then in one abrupt moment, it ends. Gone with it, it seems, are the frustrations, the stresses that governed us for its duration. At least most times. This time wasn't quite that way. For one, though we were among the last powered in Mocha, many others still had no light. So it was difficult to feel victorious. Ironically, given the fact that the corrupt governor, Ricky Rosselló's wife's family is from Mocha, Mocha got powered up rather quickly, even though we did not. Lastly, when we tried to turn on the lights, only half the house lit up. This just wouldn't be a rematriation story if the house had been powered with no complications. Shortly after having received the generator, we were bold to connect the washing machine to it, determined to use rainwater in our generator-powered machine like our neighbor. But our generator wasn't as powerful. Something got zapped. Never was able to wash those clothes. Well, I did by hand. From that point forward, the generator could only power half the house. Either an outlet or the overhead light worked in each room. Rarely both. So when they connected our house, whatever did not work with the generator turned on. Whatever did not. We got Alex, Consejo Renaissance man, to come by the house. Everyone agreed there was no way this would be fixed. Alex knew what the problem was, but the house wires were now live. He didn't dare touch them. There was no IEA electric company person with the time to come do this when they have the rest of the islands to power. We were a lightless bolsillo or pocket for months. Now we would be a limp ball in that pocket. But Alex has his connections. Placed a call, and within no time, a car pulls up with a very sarcastic, tongue-in-cheek dude full of jokes. Turns out he did work with the IAA, but that's not why he came. That's not why he was here. He was here because of the Alex Connect, and because they knew that if it was not him, this would never get fixed. Turns out the whole generator zap situation had blown a wire behind the main house fuse box. He and Alex would fix the wires along with a whole barrage of jokes. We were at their mercy. When they left, cloud of sarcasm smoke still sizzling, our house was completely illuminated. Nothing happens in the colony unless its magicians move. We are beyond grateful. A week later, as Ivan and I lay down to go to sleep, the smell of something burning grew from behind our bed. No smoke, just the smell of something burning. We followed it directly to a faulty outlet behind our headboard. We cut the power supply. Slept with the whole house dark. The next day, an electrician came and just cut the wire that fed that outlet. Cement houses withstand hurricanes but leave cracks for water to seep in. When power and plumbing issues reveal themselves, you can't just bust through concrete and cinder blocks like drywall, fix shit, then patch it up. So we sleep in the house with whatever mystery, danger looming behind the walls. That first day we had our lights back on. We sat out in the terraza till the sun went down. Walked into a dark house. It took a good long while before we remembered that we could turn the lights on. We still used the bathroom with lanterns, forgetting we could turn on the lights. For the first few nights, I took a lantern into the bedroom, complaining to Ivan that the overhead light was too bright. Each morning, we find the boys playing with their Legos in pre-dawn darkness to the light of solar linternas. In a past episode, I announced that light discussion for Trinchera de Ideas was supposed to be in December, and then I got sick and I had to postpone it. But it's interesting that it was postponed till now that we got our light, our electricity back after Hurricane María, which had been on September 20th, 2017. We received our post sometime in early December. We only got our light posts because the Consejo Comunitario of our neighborhood, the dudes got themselves a flatbed truck, worked with the mayor, and went and got those posts themselves. A lot of what was going on was people taking matters into their own hands to get powered up. La gente como Tito Kayak, who took it upon himself to start climbing posts and connecting them. most conversations around Hurricane Maria are reserved for the anniversary in September, September being the peak of hurricane season here in Puerto Rico and in the greater Caribbean. But for us, you're talking like 4.5 months of living through this aftermath of living without power in the house. And that was for us in Moca. When we were in Moca at the time, now I live in Aguada, which is not too far from where I lived before. Y para otra gente que conozco, it continued. I have friends that were without power for 6 months. I have friends that were without power for 8 months. And then we know that there were folks around the archipelago that went a lot longer without it. To reflect on light as electric light, and its symbolism for what natural light could be, what inner light is, and also, for lack of a better term, the fuckery that has been going on with Puerto Rico in the playing with our services, our utilities, as a way of really keeping the population just in a constant state of disarmament, a constant state of, not knowing what's going to pop off, not having the security to work in these post-pandemic times, although I don't think it's really post, where the world is depending so much more on virtual conversations, virtual spaces, virtual work, and never having the security of Wi-Fi, of connection, or even electricity for that matter. Applying folks who depend largely on grants and funding, and we have deadlines, but some of those deadlines may not be made because of a power outage. Or, as we saw recently, preparing to celebrate New Year's Eve and waking up on the 31st to a national blackout. These are the things that persist. This isn't a conversation from Maria. It didn't start with Maria. And long years past Maria, it persists, it continues. Now under Luma, who is still a foreign corporation here in Puerto Rico. And the birds are like chiming in. They're like, yeah, bro. Learning how to see through darkness and learning how to find one's inner and collective light through these times of darkness. I am recording this in January of 2025, which has already been a whole bomba of a year. Entre apagones, empezando para la gente que no les llegó la luz antes de la despedida del año, fuegos, fires set by tourists, and wildfires spreading across the LA area in California. Reading from the CucubaNación manifesto, we hold more lit days than anywhere else on this planet. Portal of cosmic planetary light, reduced to colonial commodity. Puerto Rico, our archipelago darkened by conquest, colonialism, extinguished by climate change storms, disappeared from nighttime satellite imagery where it once shined like a Christmas tree. Artificial light is temporary. Climate change winds send cold water surging into our warm bays. Soulless Pitiyanquis sell our beaches, chop down mangroves, starve dinoflagellates who rely on tepid waters, nutrient-rich from manglar roots. Our archipelago cancels the light pollution and artificial light, reclaims darkness as organic site of its powerful, decolonial concentration of natural light and life. There is a GIF that I love that's dated July 24th, 2017, and it moves into several days after Hurricane Maria, and it shows Puerto Rico lit up like a Christmas tree and then just gradually going dark. And the other image that I like to share when I talk about either CucubaNación or this concept of working with light and darkness as it's influenced my work is an image of our two children playing on their Lego table, sitting at their Lego table, and one of them is holding up a linterna. Y así es como lo encontrábamos todos los días por la madrugada. When we used to wake up and come out, they would already be awake, sitting there playing with their Lego table in the dark with the light of the solar linterna. But what is interesting is that around this time of year, at the end of January of 2017, when we finally got our lights back after Hurricane María, we would wake up and still find them there, playing in the dark with the light of the linterna. And all four of us would constantly forget that we had our light back and that we could turn it on. We would find ourselves using the bathroom with like the battery operated light, or just going to bed with the linterna, or finding the kids playing with the linterna. And talk about what is light. And what is light? It is a visual manifestation of energy, and the technical definition is that we have visible light. What is visible light? Is electromagnetic radiation that is perceived by the human eye, or illumination. There waves of light that, it could travel in waves, and those wavelengths could be perceived as different colors. And then we have Einstein, who identified light as photons, smallest possible particles of electromagnetic energy. And so visible light is separated into these wavelengths, or into the spectrum. And each of those wavelengths is perceived by our eyes as a different color, in the colors of the rainbow. And then they go off on either end of the spectrum as light that is no longer perceivable to our eyes, which is ultraviolet light to one side and infrared light to the other side. So what we see as color is because any object receiving waves of light, of white light, which is natural light, light of the sun, daylight, receives all this light, and that object is going to absorb those waves of light. Like the ocean will absorb all this light except the blue waves. The blue waves will actually get bounced back and reflected out, and that's what the wave of that light that is reflected back out is what our retina will catch and see as blue. And that is what determines something to be blue versus a red blouse that would receive all the light. All the waves get absorbed except the red waves. Those get reflected out. That's what our eyes pick up on. And we see that blouse is red. Darkness and blackness is the absorption of all waves of light. It is the totality of all light. White is the absence of the light or the absence of color, because everything gets reflected back. So it's very ironic that technically black is all light, whereas white is zero. And what we see as, no light waves, they're all getting reflected back. That's what we perceive as light, whereas darkness is perceived, or blackness is perceived as darkness, but blackness actually has received all the light, all the colors, and that's what makes it black. In essence, black is light. It's all the light. But this concept of all the light being reflected back with white, that is why white is considered a spiritual color. Folks who dress in white as this sort of cleanse. It means that all the energy that is being directed at you is being bounced back. It's not being absorbed by these clothes, as say a black outfit might do to you. If you are dressed entirely in black, then you are picking up on all that energy that is coming to you. So this is a side note, because it's not to say that white is the absence of color. I'm referring to inanimate objects. Like in front of me right now is a napkin and a sheet of paper, and both are white. And what that communicates is that they're reflecting all wavelengths, all colors. And so my eyes pick this up as white. We're talking about human eyes and my eyes, because animals see differently. And people also see differently, right? I'm an eye patient. How I see may not be how someone else sees, but the concept of what is known as white light. White light is the light of the sun. It is like the purest maximum expression of light. And that is why we see it as this burst of whiteness. But I don't want to give the impression that white that you see is the absence of color. Clearly, the sun is not the absence of color. It is just the maximum expression of light being shined our way. But en el vacío de lo que es el espacio, and that darkness, right? There's like this vacuum that, interestingly enough, is what allows light to shine at its fullest expression. So this concept that these two work in tandem, you can't have one without the other. You can't appreciate one without the other, which is a way that we are called to develop this equilibrium in ourselves, not just in how we see, how we perceive things, how we balance these energies within us and outside of us. And another way that it works, these wavelengths of colors that then if you put them through a prism, like a cloud filled with water ready to rain down, might then throw out that light into this prism is going to separate those wavelengths and give us a rainbow where we get to see the visible light spectrum in all those colors of the rainbow. When I first opened CucubaNación a few months later, that first class series that I did was about colors and the chakra system. I'm getting ready to do a variation of that class, starting breaking up the 7 principal chakras that everyone knows, though there are many more beyond that, in 2 sessions. So root to heart will be the first 4 sessions focused on the root chakra up to the heart. And then the second session will be repeating the heart from a different perspective. And that one is going to be called Sovereign Heart, where we pick up the conversation on the heart again and discuss it leading up to the crown chakra, lessons on sovereignty and how our heart is instrumental in creating that balance, that equilibrium that is so necessary to sovereignty. So that when we look at the light spectrum and all of these wavelengths from what's visible to what's not, and we look at the colors of the rainbow, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, that central wavelength of visible light, that color in the middle between, the infrared and the UV that we cannot perceive, the center is green. Green also being the color of the heart chakra. Every chakra has a different color of the rainbow associated with it, starting with red at the root and working its way up the colors of the rainbow up towards the crown chakra, which is violet, green being the center, the heart chakra, that being I always speak to and work with the heart chakra as the axis, as the middle ground, as the equilibrium, right? The heart is what maintains the balance between what is physical and dense and what is ephemeral, energetic, and light. And so seeing that duality between the light spectrum, the spectrum of visible light, and then the spectrum of the chakras and the energetic centers of the body, and how we work with that energetic body and the physical body to create this lightness, to create this capacity for moving energy through us, moving energy out into our lives, manifesting things, generating energy, receiving energy, generating more, giving it back out, and protecting ourselves in the process so that we're not absorbing too much negative energy and giving away too much energy, leaving us depleted in both of those cases. So this colors and the chakras class, which I describe as creative self-healing and sovereignty workshops, will be starting on February 18th with the first session, 4 sessions, root to heart. Tuesdays, it'll be 4 Tuesdays beginning on February 18th at 5:15. And then the second session, which will be 3 sessions, will begin on March 18 at 5:15 as well. So different kinds of light, artificial light, natural light, inner light, collective light. right? In terms of how it appeals to us. I'm not talking about infrared and UV. And this is not me speaking from a physics aspect. I am not a physicist. I am an artist. And so the way that I respond to light is the way that I work with it. I work with it from a physical sense with regards to not physical as in physics, but yes, to some capacity, how we perceive it, how we use it, how we move with it, and also a spiritual metaphor in light. When we speak of artificial light and speaking of it as temporary, when we think of light bulbs, when we think of light pollution, when we think of Luma as constantly presiding over these apagones, right? That the system cannot maintain these apagones. And then for some reason, here comes Luma, access to all this money. And instead of the situation getting better, it just seems to get worse and worse and worse and worse. Light pollution being one of these elements. Here I'm describing artificial light art as negative, right? So the impact that light pollution has on our wildlife, especially bioluminescence. It's one of those conditions deemed unfavorable for dinoflagellates. When we go to see these bioluminescent bays, if that water is in proximity to a coastal business or something, or homes that are just radiating all these like lights from fixtures outward, that affects the luminosity of the bay. As well, if there are other boats on the waters that have these lamps, then that's going to have the same effect. Other examples of artificial light, inauthenticity, toxic positivity, toxic spirituality, and natural light are the things we could perceive. The center of all natural light for us here on Earth is the sun. And at night, when the sun is not visible to us, but we have the stars, the aurora, and also fire and the effects of fire. And my favorite example of light is bioluminescence. My first favorite example of light is the sun. My second is any kind of bioluminescence, inner light. Inner light, what are those things in us? So the third chakra is the solar plexus, and it's sort of a representation of that inner light that burns in us. Who are our true selves? How do we see ourselves in the world? What do we radiate outward from that solar plexus? If we envision our unique selves as a sun, what do we emit from that energetic power source that is our solar plexus, which is the space between the navel and the diaphragm, represented by the color yellow, represents free will, this ability to think for our own selves, to represent our own selves, to move according to our own respective purpose and free will versus what is imposed on us, suggested to us, or expected of us. So when I think of what it means to move in that sovereign way of free will and radiating our light, shining our light to the world, I think of love and self-love, how all of that fire, that purifying fire of the solar plexus that gives way to then the heart, and love and self-love, to joy, to gratitude, and to self-trust, that confianza, that confidence that comes with self-trust. This could all then expand outward into a collective light. When folks come to CucubaNación, I have this way of looking at people and preparing the space before folks arrive, which is seeing each of us as like, say, even a dinoflagellate in the light of those bays. And when we are agitated, it gives off a spark of light. But if we come together, then what we create is the effect of these waters lighting up, or that we are a chispa, a spark of light, and we come together and create a fogata, right? A bonfire. Like, so seeing ourselves, seeing each individual that gathers at that space is that little spark of light or photon, and then coming together and whoosh, like creating this wave, this radiating this massive collective effect of luminosity, illumination, consciousness, creative potential, I also associate this with careness, with wellness, taking care of ourselves, taking care of each other. Caring for each other and respecting and loving each other means that we must care for, respect, and love ourselves so that we don't charge someone or force someone to have to do that caring work for us, right? Let that be the case because there's an emergency, because something has escalated to such a level. But we shouldn't have to force people and think that if someone loves us, it's their job to take care of us. Ain't nobody supposed to take care of us if we're not taking care of our own selves and not looking out for our own well-being first. That stuff ends when we are children. We take care of babies and children because they don't have the means themselves, okay? So this also shifts depending on people's abilities and where people are with different levels of wellness, okay? So if there are either issues around different abilities with the body, different ways that the body works. Clearly, when I had my eye issues, I was requiring a certain amount of care for certain things, but that is something that comes up and down. It shouldn't be that it's something that we force on others, that something we do and not caring for ourselves creates a condition that forces others to have to care for us or puts us in harm's way, that we then suffer some sort of harm for our own lack of self-care. Clearly, other harm comes from other whack people that are out there looking to do malicious things. But let us always flow with as much care and self-love and for ourselves that we, as much as we can protect ourselves from those things. And then when, for whatever reason, those things happen, regardless of our efforts, that's when we turn to our community for this collective care. Think also of this collective wellness that we hope that we are all conscious of self-care, collective care, that it would better allow us to exist in this state of wellness, kindness, safety and security that we provide for ourselves, safety and security that we provide for the collective, the ability to see and be seen. Some of us cannot see others. Some of us always approach others desperate for attention and for listening, those to listen, but are we too capable of seeing others? Are we capable of sitting and listening to others and connecting with what they're saying versus listening to respond? Do we draw others in talking about our problems and all the shit going on in our lives, and then when others feel connected and try to offer strategies or things that they see, do we then block them off and say, no, because we're not interested in what others have to say. We just want them to hear us and nothing more. There are also constructive ways that if we ever have to vent, we can say to people, have to engage with consent. Hey, I just need to vent. Do you mind listening to me? I'm not asking for advice. I just need to let some steam out. Do you mind listening to me? Or, hey, I'm going through A, B, or C, and I really like to hear your thoughts on this, right? So we ain't got to get mad at how people respond, because we could also be intentional in how we choose to engage with that person by letting them know what hopes and intentions we have for that conversation, right? And we could do that in both ways. We could do that for ourselves and each other and do it together. And that's loving. So loving is not like imposing what we think that person needs and saying to them, you should do this and this and that, and then getting mad when the person doesn't do it. That's not help. That's not loving either. So we just need to move into a more aware, more conscious way of engaging by being transparent about how we're coming into that situation, what our expectations are, and letting each other know, hey, this is how I'm showing up today. This is what I'm needing today. No, today I'm actually needing to be alone and to be in silence. I need space. Or I'm coming today because I need you to. I need to hear someone's thoughts and what I'm going through. I'm coming today because I just need to sit in silence with someone. I just need someone to witness me in this process and listen to what I have to say, but I feel too vulnerable to hear judgment and advice. I'm just still trying to find my way. Will you help me by just allowing me to share some things out loud? Sometimes in sharing things out loud, we find our own clarity. Abundance being another form of collective light. Can we do all of this? Abundance, collectivity should always be abundance. Anytime we have more than one thing, that's abundance. Collectivity and community should always feel abundant. And it could feel more so if we're transparent with our expectations and hopes. The thing is that in order to know light, we must know darkness. We must know what we're working with, right? There could be a shadow side of light. Sometimes we want too much light. Sometimes we want to come into situations and we want to have friends that are happy all the time and only talk to us about good things. But when those friends are going through shitty times, we don't want to be around them. When the friends are going through something awful, they're too heavy. We don't want to be there. And so then there's an imbalance. Or even in ourselves, we only see the good parts of ourselves, but we don't want to see the shitty parts of ourselves. We go out into the world, we unleash our shitty selves on other people, but because we're not willing to see those parts of ourselves, we don't understand when people get pissed at us. And we have to be willing to know, to see, and to master the good qualities of ourselves, the light qualities of ourselves, the cool qualities, the qualities that are cool to be around versus the things about ourselves that might repel others. The way that our darkness comes out into the world. So the way that let me just get that. We can't have too much light if we don't know what to do with it. And we can't handle it. Too many of us calling in the light, but won't face our own shadows, ignore our own shadows. If we don't work with both, we can end up with a wildfire. So the way that the indigenous people worked with these lands in California is that they cleansed the land and they created these purposeful fires, these strategic, controlled fires in ways that would then prepare the land so that if a wildfire was to come, it wouldn't be as catastrophic if that land hadn't been cleared out, hadn't been maintained and prepared. So it's a way of recognizing the natural process of the land and working with it in harmony with it so that it could work symbiotically with the human communities that live alongside the forest. But if we're not willing to work with the light, the forest is good, the forest is beautiful, the forest gives light, the trees give oxygen. We appreciate all the light of the forest, but the forest has its shadows. The fires may come and this forest will completely burn. That is a shadow. By knowing that shadow, by knowing that possibility, we could work with it to mitigate it so it doesn't get out of control. We gotta know light, we gotta know shadow. It is living in harmony with the earth's natural rhythms. And so living in harmony, it's like this interdependence. We rely on the forest would rely on humans to help it, right, clear with those strategic fires. And we create this symbiotic relationship or this interdependence. Colonialism thrusts us and perpetuates this dependence on the imperialists when our natural resources are sacked, when our amenities are limited, when our resources become limited because of the exploitation and the extraction, and because racism is the unequal distribution of wealth because of racial prejudice. And so independence would say that we could exist without, and we are capable of existing without the imperialists. And interdependence then says that to be independent is not just every man for themselves, like we've seen in the Western world in many respects, where, for example, human can sack nature and without a consideration of what impact that has on the earth and what impact that has on the seven generations to come. Instead of working with one another independently, that we don't need each other, that we don't rely on each other. We can create the symbiosis. We can work interdependently. And we have so many examples of that with bioluminescence. So for example, I have this other passage from the CucubaNación manifesto. Blackness is the original canvas, conceived in the darkness of the cosmos, created in the darkness of the womb. It contains the expansive treasures of the abyss, black canvas upon which creation scribbles light as stars, as moons, nebula's conception of new life, light as fireflies, cucubanos, dinoflagellates, and other infinite forms of bioluminescent marine life, light as testament to life thriving in harsh environments, light most resplendent when conditions are favorable, but still shines in radical testimony when conditions are unfavorable. Light as luminous language, energetic communications through dark skies and dark water like sonar. Earlier, I mentioned how light pollution around these bioluminescent bays may affect the luminosity of those waters of the dinoflagellates in the waters, might affect the luminosity of cucubanos y luciérnagas, the fireflies or lightning bugs and the bioluminescent click beetles. But other favorable conditions means, for example, with dinoflagellates, is the water warm enough, right? If a storm surge is coming into those bays, the water is going to be cold and they're not going to glow as much. With all the deforesting happening of the coastlines and the chopping of manglares, dinoflagellates rely on the nutrients of those manglares, those roots in the waters, to thrive. So with all that coastal deforestation that we're seeing by like Jennifer Gonzalez and all the rich people that are chopping down the manglar in La Palguera to construct their lavish vacation homes, all of these things affect the microorganisms and the whole ecosystem in that area. Not to mention that those manglares also protect the coastlines from coastal flooding. This is all measuring the favorable versus unfavorable conditions for shining. And so we also have this with the cucubanos and the dinoflagellados, the luciérnaga, all of the deep sea bioluminescence, all of this lighting up that we see in these creatures. Bioluminescence, when living organisms light up and emit light. It all happens through luciferase, which is an enzyme that binds oxygen and a protein called luciferin together. The name Lucifer, luciferin actually comes from this concept of, in Latin, the bringer of light, the bearer of light. It's also used to reference Venus. Venus was in the skies and then after some time dips below she's in the night skies and then dips below the horizon, not to be seen for a while. It's like she goes dark and then all of a sudden she emerges as a morning star rising with the sun or just before the sun. When we think of interdependence, other cases with bioluminescence is the siphonophore. The siphonophore is a creature that looks kind of like a transparent bioluminescent eel, but it has all these little segments in it. Each segment lights up and it seems to share like a central column down the center. So it's this long, elongated creature. But what's interesting is that it's not an animal with different segments. It's actually one long community of each segment representing an entirely different organism that kind of adhere to each other and connect and function as one soul, long collective. Another example is that of the anglerfish. A lot of these animals work symbiotically to shine. And the way that works, the way that happens is within that linterna that the anglerfish carries. It's just kind of like us. I never thought about this because I've painted the angler several times for my portraits from the Trench Project. But it is very Boricua in the sense que camina con linterna, okay? And so that little lantern that the anglerfish carries above her head is actually filled with bioluminescent bacteria that light up. So it's not she herself who light up, it's like other organisms in there doing the lighting up for her. In that sense, it could be, I'm sure that there's another symbiotic way of how they exist there and how they live off of her, so that there's, this mutual benefit. So thinking of this idea, and I talked about working in harmony with the earth and creating a balance, an equilibrium with the earth's rhythm. So we think about our inner clock, our ancestral and personal rhythms, circadian rhythm, how we disrupt that with the use of devices and the blue light in televisions and computer screens and phones that people try to take to bed with them, that people are looking at all night. Our ancestors, once that sun set and lights went low, and maybe they worked with candlelight, that encouraged the release of serotonin that prepared our ancestors' bodies to prepare for rest, to get ready for rest, to get ready for sleep. When we introduce all these lights, all these crazy ass overhead lights that are super bright, or these cool white lights which are made to mimic daylight, because we want our homes to be completely illuminated and we just want to keep working, doing, producing late into the night, means that when we lay down to go to sleep, our body hasn't sufficiently prepared for that transition. We may lay down and go to sleep and not fall asleep at all. Many people talk about insomnia. They don't know why they have insomnia. Meanwhile, they're bombarding their systems with light. As something to consider, to turn our lights low as the sun goes down. Again, that spectrum of red is it's a more suitable spectrum of light for the eyes in the evenings than the blue light that we see in daylight. And so having warm yellow bulbs instead of cool, those bright white LEDs, that's not really good for the body after sundown. Trying to have a similar rhythm of waking up more or less around the same time every day, trying to go to sleep around the same time every day, honoring these rhythms in our bodies. The way that our ancestors also honored rhythms. They didn't have clocks, they didn't have devices, but they had the sky. The sky functioned as their calendar. In the darkness of the night sky, they could see which constellations were up, and those constellations that were on view would inform them what time of year it was, when the rains would come, when the drought period would come, and which crops were ready to be planted. And it also told them the directions for which they associated different semillas with each direction, and several in different crops for different times of the year. Some thrived with the wet season, some didn't. And knowing what to plant and how and when according to this calendar of the rising sun, of the solstices, of the equinoxes, and of the constellations. We'll find is that those of us we are Puerto Rico, the archipelago of Borikén is in the northern hemisphere. So when this winter solstice comes, it'll be the shortest nights of the year, more darkness. When the solstice comes, when the winter solstice comes around December 21st, those are the shortest days of the year, the longest nights. And what that means is that having exposure to less sun may make us a little more lethargic, a little more slow. And so although there's all these traditions of la fiesta y todo esto that came from outside, that came from Europe, that's how this came here, right? But then we also had harvest festivals and things like that. And that is celebratory. So there is a way that the harvest, connects to other stuff. But harvest would be more with the equinox than it would be in the winter. In the winter, we're preparing to slow down. In the winter, we are preparing to just go within and little by little come back out in the spring when everything wakens up again. That is the system, that is the cycle. So that when this Gregorian calendar is imposed and everybody's told, New Year's Day or the beginning of the new year, you have to run out there with all your resolutions, run to the gym, you got to do this in your job, work harder, play harder, go out more. and then we adhere to something that ancestrally doesn't even register with our bones and our DNA. And then we wonder why we're not as productive as we're wanting ourselves to be. So just that importance of planning goals according to our natural rhythm. And that is why El Batey Principal de Caguana actually has 2 caminos that line up with the solstices of the sun. So beyond being a batey to celebrate and to party and to carry out el areito, they also function as these calendars, marking with those paths the rising and setting suns of the solstices. So working with light, sovereignty, soberanía, how do we work with light to cultivate them? How do we work with light to cultivate sovereignty, soberanía? Know our shadows, triggers, fears, master them. Know our light strengths, contributions. Own and embody our own authenticity and truth. Familiarize ourselves with our bodies and spirits, caring for these and their energetic frequencies. Safeguard ourselves from negative, extractive, toxic energies. Care for our eyes, vision, sight, and circadian rhythms. Maintain a balance with the earth, its rhythm, and our ancestral rhythms. Attune to these rhythms. Know and honor our own equilibrium. And like Mostef Yasin Bey sings and Umi says, shine your light for the world to see. He also says, I want Black people to be free. How do we work with light as a tool that our ancestors knew? Darkness is a necessary component of light. It is not evil. It is not bad. It is something that we are to know and master so we can have maximum benefit. Thank you so much for listening to another episode, especially if you got through this whole thing. This is one of the longer episodes. Much, much appreciate the support. Podcast episodes are posted around the new and full moons and some surprises in between. More info can be found at rematriatingborikén.com. That's Rematriating with an M and Borikén, Borikén. If you like what you hear, you can like, you can subscribe, you can share with others. Thank you so much for supporting. Much love.